The Brock Nelson extension might as well be Winnipeg's biggest don't sign these guys in free agency when it comes to the big center market.
Your Locked On Jets, your daily podcast on the Winnipeg Jets, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hey friends, and welcome to tonight's episode of Locked On Winnipeg Jets, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. I'm your host, Harrison Lee, an avid Winnipeg Jets fan and an online blogger. You can follow me on Twitter at HLivingLoco and at LO_Winnipeg Jets. Thanks for making Locked On Jets your first listen of the day every day. If you like what you're hearing, be sure to like, follow, and subscribe on all of your favorite podcasting platforms and YouTube. Doing so, of course, is always free of charge and ensures you never miss another episode. Most of all, though, we just love and appreciate your support. Tonight's episode, oh boy, Brock Nelson just signed a $7.5 million deal for 3 years. And by the way, that's $7.5 million per season, not for the full time. So that is a very hefty chunk of cash, a lot of money. And let me tell you, if ever the Jets needed a big warning not to sign UFAs, especially big name centers, this is probably one of the biggest. Sometimes, you get disappointed when the Jets don't explore free agency, but this is one of those times where you are probably thrilled they are not in that price range. Speaking of UFAs, Ehlers wants a chance to win big. Could that still be in Winnipeg? We'll chat about that and talk a little bit about some of the emerging trade rumors around a couple of top young defenders in Keandre Miller and Bowen Byram. Before we dive in, though, did want to let you know that today's episode is brought to you by Monarch Money. Take control of your finances with Monarch Money. Use code LOCKEDONNHL at monarchmoney.com for 50% off your first year. Now, let's chat about the Brock Nelson extension. So this deal obviously is the Avs kind of saying that they might have screwed up. I don't know that they would have done this in ordinary circumstances if they hadn't put so much time and effort and, frankly, resources into such a big acquisition. And their reward for the whole thing was for Nelson to kind of put up similar results to like Nemesnikov. Now, do I think Nelson has more skill and ability than Nemesnikov does offensively? Sure. I don't think that that's really in question. Nemesnikov, he brings more value in the defensive side of things, whereas Nelson's probably more going to be that setup guy, the playmaker, the passer, decent shooter, decent skater. And so, I don't think he was awful for Colorado, but for the price that they paid Callum Ritchie in a huge trade package, it was bad. I mean, you have to look at the results for what he did for them and just come away feeling that they made a mistake. And I think that this contract is kind of, to me, a little bit of a desperation play. The Avs don't have many more prospects to keep trading away in future trade deadlines. Their pool's running low. And because of this, I feel like the Nelson deal is the most, oh crap, we have a very bad looking deal on our hands. In retrospect, we need to try and salvage this and make it look productive and keep somebody that we spent so much to acquire. And so, the Nelson deal is expensive. I would not have done it. I would imagine that if he had come to Winnipeg, he'd probably have signed a similar extension. So in many ways, maybe we dodged a bullet. If it cost us like a Lambert or a Perfetti or, heaven forbid, a Chibrikov or something, probably not going to be as happy with what he did, plus the extension and how much, you get locked in for the next 3 years with that. That is a lot of money for a player putting up like third line results. So yeah, not great. And I think for the Jets, the bigger point here is you're looking at the free agent center market, and it's grim. You've got Tavares, Giroux, and Giroux's not really a center right now. You've got Sam Bennett, maybe a few others. Now, a lot of you are probably going to say the Jets need to bring Bennett in. The thing with Bennett is that he looks really, really good, and he puts up very good numbers because he doesn't have to be a top 6 kind of guy for the Panthers. There, he's kind of like in the top 9, but he's not really made a focal point of their offense. When he inevitably does move to a bigger team and gets signed for like $9-10 million, I think people are going to realize that he was generally a supporting piece more than he was a key driver. Is he good and is he a gritty forechecking player who can bring some real offense? Absolutely. Is he going to repeat what he did in Florida? Probably not. Not at the price range that he's going to be asking for. He's going to get a big, big payday, and I think some team is going to get a little bit suckered into what I will call the Panthers mojo and think that Bennett was really the source of that success when it's more the environment that he was in. And so for me, that's a huge pass. The other guy that I kind of feel like the Jets might be looking at is Mikael Granlund. And Granlund obviously went kind of ham against the Jets in a particular game in the playoff series. But my general feeling about him is that he's a little one-dimensional, right? He's a very good finisher. He can score on the power play and at 5v5. And that's kind of where his ability sort of drops off. If you want two-way transition and strong play driving ability, that's not his game. He doesn't really defend. He's not some big setup guy. He's a good finisher, and that's a valuable skill set, but he's probably looking for a decent raise. And for me, I'm just like, I'm not really thrilled with that. I think Winnipeg needs more out of their play from the middle. And you're also talking about a dude who's 33. So, his tail off and decline is probably going to hit pretty soon. And I just feel like he's going to get a big raise. And for a lot of reasons, I am not super in love with that. I've seen one guy, though, that's popped up that does have my attention, Pius Suter. Suter I would actually be okay with. He's probably going to get a fairly decent raise. He put up pretty good numbers for the Canucks this year. And, he actually has really strong two-way results. I'd say he kind of reminds me a little bit of Cup from Cop's prime a few years ago. So if Suter would be a player that you could bring into your middle six to sort of fortify that depth, I don't think he would be, the best option, but I think he would be a very good one if the trade market's looking grim. That said, I still prefer Winnipeg to go out and try and bring in a bigger center, right? Somebody who can really move the needle. I think the Jets kind of have to do that anyways because their winger group is about to take a notable hit with Ehlers walking. And for the Jets, it's a situation where if they can still strengthen down the middle, I think that they have players who are capable of playing out wide and doing a good job there. They just don't have many players who can do the inverse. There are very few centers on this team that I really trust to put up big numbers. And if Lowry does not recover and rehab to his pre-injury levels, you've got a serious challenge. Winnipeg's going to be down a lot of their center depth. It's going to be down to Scheifele, whatever Lowry can do. Maybe Nemesnikov, Byram, who else? Maybe Toninato. You could argue Lambert might play center, which, he could. You've got maybe David Gustafson if he sticks around, but I just don't really feel like the Jets have players, A, that they're willing to give big shots down the middle to, and B, that can be enough of a difference maker. I wish they would have given Gustafson more room to grow and a chance to really take on a role with this team in a more middle six fashion. I think he continues to be very underappreciated, and I really wish that they would give him a shot. He had really good chemistry in the minor leagues with Perfetti, so maybe you should try that. I don't know. It could just so crazy it might work, He's a good center. He's got a lot of skill. I think he's got good size. He's strong as heck, and if you're the kind of coach that likes these gritty physical guys, Gustafson's kind of that player, which is always very shocking that he doesn't really get that much ice time. So something to keep in mind. But I think the biggest takeaway is, for the most part, the top of the free agency class this year, it ain't going to be good. Stay far away. Don't do what Colorado's doing and get suckered into a bad deal. Now, if there is a deal I would hope the Jets would be able to get suckered into, but I know probably won't, it is a Nikolai Ehlers extension. We'll chat about what's going on with that and his desires to win big in just a little bit. Have you ever checked your bank account and wondered where the heck all your money went? Between dining out, online shopping, and entertainment, it's easy to lose track, and that's where Monarch Money comes in. It's your personal CFO giving you full visibility and control over your finances. It's a lot like signing a bunch of free agents, except you're not trying to sign centers. You want to cut costs, and you want to be smart about your options, whether you're investing in defenders or wingers. Monarch Money is a lot of the same thing. It's not just a budgeting app. It's a complete financial command center. It's like having your own GM to track your accounts, investments, and spending in one place, so you stop just managing your money and you actually start building wealth. You have collaborative tools if you've got a partner or spouse to always stay on the same page. It's all in one spot, and you get surprising insights to where you're maybe spending more than you realized. So take control of your finances with Monarch Money. Use code LOCKEDONNHL at monarchmoney.com for 50% off your first year. That's monarchmoney.com, code LOCKEDONNHL for half off your first year. Hey friends, and welcome back to this episode of Locked On Winnipeg Jets, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Everydayers, thank you so much for rejoining us as we are chatting about the looming Ehlers departure. And look, I am very much in the camp that I expect him to walk. I really don't think that that's going to be a question. He said earlier, or at least on 32 Thoughts, Friedman was basically saying that Ehlers has on his list the desire to win, a chance to win somewhere. And I think the somewhere is probably a bigger point because, you're looking at the Jets, right? You look at his usage, and unfortunately, because Winnipeg spent so many years using him like a third liner when he's one of the highest 5v5 point creators in the league. He ranks ninth by scoring rates, by the way. He's got a lot of evidence not to stick around with the Jets. Ehlers has probably lost $10 million on his next deal because the points production just doesn't match his skill set. And, with his deployments and stuff, the fact that it took this long for Arniel just to use him on the first power play and, the continued 5v5 issues where Appleton's playing more, he just has every reason to walk. And I really don't think that there's a scenario where he does stick around. The only reason that I think he could come back to the Jets is really if he tests free agency and he doesn't see what he likes. That feels like a very unlikely scenario. Somebody out there has to be giving him money, probably a lot of it, by the way. And I can't imagine that a talent like him, very clearly one of the best wingers on the market, and certainly one of the best play-driving wingers, and really forwards, generally speaking, is going to stick around for very long and open on the open market, right? It just doesn't happen. You don't really see it. And Nick has so much talent, so much skill. Somebody out there will give him a big deal. And it makes me wonder if the Jets are really serious about trying to keep him. I talked a little bit ago about the CJOB piece that I did not like. I felt it was kind of in poor taste, and I really felt like the way that it was framed was that the Jets were doing all that they could to keep Ehlers and stuff. And maybe they are now, and I would certainly believe that interpretation, but there's a reason for that. They mishandled Nick for years, and it's not something that's new. They kind of learned, I think, from the Cole Perfetti situation, where now Perfetti is given a much bigger part of this team's share of the ice time. He's been given a bigger role, still not as good as it could be, but generally speaking, he's not getting benched during the playoffs. He's given more prime deployments, and so that's a good change, right? With Ehlers, I just think even if they adjust it further, it's too late. His agent's probably looking for the first exit. And he'll look at teams like Carolina. Maybe Ehlers goes to, I don't know. There aren't many teams that I think could fit his cap hit. One team, though, that I kind of keep coming back to, and that would sort of be a bit of a nightmare scenario for me, is Utah. Utah, I don't know why, but they just have the vibe of a team that's going to do something big, and it could be a perfect fit. Tourney plays his team very fast. They are a quick counter team. They have great transition players. Ehlers, to me, almost seems like a perfect fit. I don't know how the cap situation would exactly work, but if they can move some salary around, and obviously with the cap going up, that's going to benefit them too, they have some real options to bring him in, and he will be an unholy nightmare against teams in the Central. We know that with bigger deployments and bigger roles, Ehlers has really feasted, and if he finally gets to be used as a real top six player, you're going to really see why I think a lot of us have been hammering the idea that the Jets effed up. This is a bad loss for Winnipeg. And as much as I would love to have him back, I also completely respect the decision that he's likely going to choose. He's not going to stick around. He has no incentive to. And as much as he may love the players on this team and the community, the team itself didn't really give him enough of a fair shake over the years and really give him the sort of deployments that he deserved. And that CJOB piece really bothered me in particular because Ehlers has never complained about it. How many instances do you recall Nick being genuinely upset at the team and vocalizing it? I can't really think of anything. He's been a consummate professional for years. Maybe he hints about it once or twice and, you get a sense that he's not thrilled, but he doesn't ever really go out there and throw the team under the bus. One of the first things that often you hear out of him is how he needs to improve his own game and wants to focus on what he can do to help the team. And for me, I will always respect that. players who can really be humble in that manner. I think, it's important. And I think it also just shows that the Jets, again, really, have bungled the situation. And it's a shame. You have a player that you've developed in-house for years. So many other teams are probably foaming at the mouth to bring him in. I could see a scenario where he maybe goes to Pittsburgh. That doesn't really feel like a team that's going to be a big competitor, but maybe, he goes there, he significantly improves their top six or something. I don't know. I mean, there's real choices that he could make. It's either Utah or Carolina, probably. The Canes, I'm sure, would love to add him. Hopefully they can finally get past the Eastern Conference Finals. That continues to be a real bugbear for them. And, as much as they do actually make the dance, at least to that level, getting to the final cup has been a real challenge. So maybe Ehlers is the guy that pushes them over. That could be a real scenario. Does he have an opportunity to stick around with the Jets? Probably not. I think that there's going to be one of those things where it's like you're saying there's a chance, 1 in a million, but I think we all know where this is all heading. And so it just really underscores the need for the Jets to hit this summer out of the park. Winnipeg is about to operate with its back against the wall yet again. They're going to have to try and scrap something together. And, maybe they can do something really big at the draft. Maybe they can do something really impressive with some big trade that none of us are considering. There's a lot of teams looking to shake things up, and what they're offering is exactly the kind of stuff that the Jets could use in their top 9. So, all hope is not lost. I think that's the biggest thing. It just requires this Jets team to change the way that they operate. I think that that's been a continuous thing that I've struggled with over the years. I've had to learn to not be as upset about it because the Jets just aren't likely to change. And whatever I think or whatever you think, none of that really tends to meet and sort of make it all the way up the ranks. But every now and then, they do something that a lot of us agree with. And maybe that's a sign that the team is hopefully focused on the future and wanting to change. This team has come a long way. They've got, the first President's Trophy, which is awesome. They've taken big steps forward. Now it's time to take that next evolution and do it the Pokemon thing, right? You've reached another stage where it's time to take your experience and level up. And your next form might truly be disgustingly good. Now, I know somebody on my last episode sort of expressed some doubt about the quality of the prospects and why they are getting played in Winnipeg's grouping. And I don't disagree with that assessment. I think where I would still be more optimistic is that I think some of those guys are a little more distant, but the players that are more NHL ready, I think are going to have outsized roles with this team and could really move the squad in a more positive direction. If they can get Arniel's trust and continue to deliver results, I think that that's pushing this squad towards a better outcome. Yes, it is a little late for this to be happening. I think that they should have done this probably long ago. That would have given the Jets a firmer foundation to build around, and maybe they wouldn't be scrambling for a 2C yet again, as they have been for like the last 3 or 4 years. But, I want to be optimistic about things. It's hard to not be sometimes. It's hard to kind of have the downer view, which I've had for many years. I want to really feel like this team can take a step forward. I also know that this is a business, and sometimes the business tends to override all. But hopefully, with this upcoming summer, the Jets do something that proves us all wrong, right? I know personally I have my doubts. I know that I'm not real convinced of a lot of things. I think the Ehlers situation is a great example of why I just don't trust this front office to get it right. I want them to do it, but I know that they have a lot of reasons why they've struggled to get things off the ground, choices they've made, internal conflicts, geographic restrictions. I get all that. But at some point, man, it's time for the rubber to meet the road. This Jets team has come too far for it to be, something that sort of peters out and goes away with a whimper, right? This team needs to roar. And if it can have a good summer this coming, warm season, maybe next season has something special in store. But again, time for the summer of Chevy to nut up or shut up. Amidst that summer of Chevy, there are a couple of guys who are going to be talked about as big trade targets. And I want to talk about why Keandre Miller and Bowen Byram, for various reasons, may not be the targets the Jets should go for. Greetings, friends, and welcome back to this episode of Locked On Winnipeg Jets, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Every day, thank you so much for rejoining us on tonight's episode as we are just, we're wrapping up with some thoughts on the front office being aggressive, making some big moves. Now, two names have come up, and for various reasons, I'm a little skeptical about, their fit in Winnipeg. But K'Andre Miller and Bowen Byram are both apparently available on the trade market. Bowen Byram, I think for me, is the guy I'd really want to avoid. Byram is very skilled offensively, and he is a dynamic skater. He's a fun player, don't get me wrong, but I think where I tend to have issues with him is that his defensive game is really lacking. For a guy who wears number 4, he actually reminds me a lot of Neil Pionk. And while Pionk sometimes has some good offensive production, a lot of it is because Sandberg is kind of leading the way. I know somebody on our last episode said something about Pionk being the real number 2 and Sandberg being number 3. I don't really feel like I agree with that assessment. For me, Pionk is very clearly 3rd or 4th on the pecking order. It's because of Sandberg that he has risen so high. Now, all due respect to him, he had a really big playoffs, and so I think he deserves a ton of credit for that. But I look at Pionk's overall body of work, and when he's away from Sandberg, it starts to get pretty messy. So I think Byram has a lot of the same challenges, right? Again, if you put him in a very insulated environment where he can be maybe a power play specialist, somebody who can really not worry about the two-way game and just focus on the offensive zone, you're probably going to get some decent value out of him. He can score, he can pass, he can shoot, he can skate. He does all the stuff that looks really visually appealing. I just don't think his overall game really supports the kind of contract he's after. He wants like 6.5, 7 million, maybe north of that. And I'm like, no, yeah, just no. He's not really worth that contract. And you're going to have to think about the assets that you'd even need to give up to get him. Now, Buffalo might have to sell him at a little bit of a discount just because, if he's really asking for this much money and all these teams that have had him don't seem to be that keen on a big extension, that might impact the perception of what his actual trade value is. But he's also 23. He's a young defender playing like 20-ish minutes a night. He had, nearly 40 points this past season. Somebody will probably pay a lot for him. Maybe. I know I don't want it to be the Jets, and I don't really think Winnipeg could even do it anyways, right? They already just signed Pionk, and for that reason, I kind of feel like he would be a redundant piece, right? You don't need 2 Pionks on this team. You've got one. It's already expensive enough. Move on. K'Andre Miller is a little bit more of an interesting proposition because K'Andre has had a couple of really fun seasons, and in the past few years, it's been rough. Now, Miller, they've tried to make him a couple of different things, right? They've tried to really focus on his defensive side of his game. They've tried to make him a two-way puck mover. They've tried to, make him more offensively minded, and it just doesn't seem like recently he's had a lot of success with any one thing. There are moments where he'll have really good shifts, and you can see some of that dynamic skating that he has and some of the big shot potential. But then, you'll notice he'll have a defensive miscue where he just blindly turns it over, kind of like Stanley or even Myers back in the day, and you just don't really understand what's going through his mind in that moment. And it just seems like he's being asked to do too many different things, and so maybe it's more about simplifying his game, and that's how you kind of so-called fix him. I guess my concern is that the Jets would need to give up pretty big assets to bring him in. The Rangers aren't going to be getting a cheap offer out of him, that's for sure. And, teams are already talking about offer sheeting him, which, that's going to be expensive, most likely. So, for me, I just think the Jets already have a lot of pieces on the back end. It's a crowded blue line, and these aren't the kinds of names that I'm looking to bring in to try and really overhaul the blue line. I do think Miller is probably a guy who would do well in Winnipeg and would, fit this team reasonably well. I just feel like if we're talking about spending a lot of assets to bring in a really big top 4 defender, you really need to take a bigger swing, right? A Dobson type, somebody who's really proven, who's, top pairing potential. That's the sort of name that you need to go for. The Jets don't really need more middle of the rotation defenders. They got to find somebody who can really change this blue line from top to bottom. And, it's hard because you've got Morrissey, who's really great and is clearly, elite in franchise level. You've got Sandberg, who's kind of elite. But then you have a lot of other guys that are sort of, either decent or declining. And so it's a little bit imbalanced. The Jets' left side is fantastic. The Jets' right side is, yeah, it's a right side. I love DeMello. He's getting older. You can tell. Pionk really has to play with Sandberg to work well. Colin Miller, for Lord knows what reason, the team just doesn't trust him. So, your right side's not looking great. We've got another year of Luke Shen probably, which, I'm already bracing myself for. You've got Colin Miller, who's probably going to ride Pine for half the year. So I just don't really know what the plan is. I know Salomonson's going to be here soon, but you still have to find some big piece. Asking Elias to really lead the way alongside Morrissey is a lot to ask of a prospect. And, the Jets just need to start swinging. They are in a very tight competitive window. They have 1 year left after this of Connor. And so it's not looking great. I'll say that. It's not looking great. So if the Jets are trying to trade for a defender, don't go for the lower end stuff. That's going to still be expensive. Swing for the fences. Let other teams try and see if they can fix either of Byram or Miller. I think there are other environments that are going to be conducive to their success. I just don't think the Jets have that luxury. And Winnipeg really needs to focus on centers anyways. I think the defense is okay as it is. I don't think it's great, but I think it's probably going to have to do until they can figure something out a little more concretely. But, the forward depth, that's where you really got to focus your assets. That is what my summer would be about. And I'd love to hear what your summer of Chevy includes, right? Are you looking at a center and a winger, maybe a top four defender? How greedy are you getting on your shopping list? Drop your ideal summer of Chevy below. I might rate the best ones and talk about which ones really stand out to me on tomorrow's episode. I think a lot of you are going to have some really funny ones, partly because we're all living in fantasy land right now and we're all hoping that the Jets do something really crazy, but we probably know it's going to be something a little more modest. But hey, usually when we have low expectations is when something surprising happens, right? I don't think any of us thought the Dubois trade was going to be as good as it was. It's been a godsend for the Jets. You look at the Kane return. That was amazing back then. The Jets can turn, some really salty lemons into some real sweet lemonade. So maybe, just maybe, this summer has one more surprise up its sleeve. But again, drop your best summer of Chevy interpretations below, and I'll talk about them on tomorrow's episode. But for tonight's show, that's all the time that we have. I thank you so much for listening and making Locked On Jets your first listen of the day. See you tomorrow. Have a great night. And as always, go Jets go.